Hello and welcome to the Trash Can of Ideology. This new series is devoted to critically analyzing current political and socioeconomic viewpoints and content from a far-left perspective. I was originally going to make this pilot about PragerU's video on Venezuela, but thankfully, Base Dennis seems to pump out the best ideological fodder at the best of times. Today, we have before us their latest upload titled, "If You Hate Poverty, You Should Love Capitalism." Let's get into it.
The next time you hear someone complain about capitalism, consider this. The percentage of people living at starvation-level poverty has fallen 80% since 1970.
Poverty will never really be solved if there's always some class of people at the bottom level of society. The meaning of extreme poverty will only change to fit new conditions, regardless of whether or not some arbitrary threshold is met.
So how did this remarkable transformation come to pass? Was it the fabulous success of the United Nations? The generosity of U.S. foreign aid?
It is not only possible, but probable, that in the course of this process many peoples will fall, for varying periods, under the influence of Moscow, whose ideology has a greater lure for such peoples, and probably greater reality, than anything we could oppose to it. In the face of this situation, we would be better off to dispense now with a number of the concepts which have underlined our thinking with regard to the Far East. We should cease to talk about vague and for the Far East unreal objectives such as human rights, the raising of the living standards, and democratization. The day is not far off when we are going to have to deal in straight power concepts.
The brilliant policies of the International Monetary Fund and World Bank?
The IMF agreed to loan Yugoslavia money, but required a series of reforms which worsened unemployment, decentralized the Communist Party, and helped fuel nationalism.
Stimulus spending? Government redistribution? No. It was none of those things. It was capitalism. Billions of souls around the world have been able to pull themselves out of poverty thanks to
opportunities targeted toward impoverished people willing to work longer hours for less wages than the inhabitants of an employer's original region of operation.
Globalization, free trade, property rights, the rule of law, and entrepreneurship. Globalization means the ever-increasing ability to move goods, people, and ideas from one distant location to another.
It realistically means the damaging of domestic job markets within developed nations for the acquisition of cheaper labor elsewhere, at the expense of those nations' people. One could make the argument that this practice does raise people from poverty due to the increased amount of work opportunities, but it does not mean that the wages for these jobs are in any way much better than what's already available there, unless we're talking about careers requiring a significant level of expertise, a quality that is far and few between for most people living in poor conditions.
Free trade is open access to markets and people from all over the world with few, if any, barriers.
Yes, it is easier access to cheap labor through dirt poor workers willing to exploit themselves for the sake of feeding their starving families. But remember, the freer the market, the freer the people.
Property rights is ensuring that what belongs to you can't be taken away on a whim by the state.
When in reality, it's the current capitalist state structure that does better to protect a person from the volatile nature of capitalism than it does to harm them. This protection also applies to the property rights of the wealthy ruling class that puppeteers the current state apparatus in the first place.
The rule of law safeguards contracts, assuring that they will be respected and lived up to whether the deal is made in Peru or Poland.
Basically saying, no matter where you are in the world, you can never escape global capitalism.
And entrepreneurship is the creativity of free people to dream up new products that we never knew we wanted or needed.
Entrepreneurs themselves end up becoming the same people that outsource jobs to impoverished countries in order to get a fatter paycheck for themselves.
These 5 things were all made possible by the historic peace after World War II that resulted from America's global diplomatic and military presence.
Here it sounds like the Soviet Union and the Cold War never existed, or all the democratic governments that were replaced by right-wing dictators backed by the United States, or the 20 million people that the US killed in almost 40 nations over the past 70 years, or the countless proxy wars fought between it and the Soviets. Definitely sounds like an example of a historic peace.
The ideals of free enterprise and global leadership, central to capitalism and American conservatism, are responsible for the greatest reduction in human misery since mankind began its long climb from the swamp to the stars.
Also, how exactly is human misery defined here?
You'd think conservative ideas would be gaining strength every single day.
No.
Everywhere.
No.
And not just gaining strength among conservatives, but also among young idealists.
No.
Immigrants.
No.
Minorities.
No.
And advocates for the poor.
No.
All embracing the principles of free enterprise and unleashing its power on behalf of the vulnerable. But this hasn't happened.
Maybe this hasn't happened because these people are too busy trying to make ends meet in a dysfunctional socioeconomic landscape to care. The jobs that people do manage to get today are requiring an ever-increasing amount of work just to sustain oneself.
To the contrary, capitalism is struggling to attract new followers. Indeed, some believe it's destined to fade away,
Yes.
just as it has in much of Europe.
Capitalism and socialism, in reality, are not that far apart.
Why does capitalism get such a bad rap? One answer is simple. The defenders of free enterprise have done a terrible job of telling people how much good the system has done around the world.
I'm just gonna skip this garbage.
This ignorance has consequences because there's no substitute for capitalism and the 5 innovations that make it work.
You're right, because there is no other system but capitalism that can fit the conditions for capitalism to work.
Years of economic research tell us no other system comes close.
Are you going to give a source for those years of economic research, or
Certainly not communism, not even socialism. You need a system that works while you sleep.
Which is why businesses and stock markets have opening and closing times.
One that creates the foundations of human prosperity.
Last time I checked, the Great Depression and the 2008 recession aren't examples of human prosperity. If I recall correctly, the Great Depression brought the Nazis and a lot of poor, starving people that couldn't be provided for because the free market economy wasn't motivated to provide for their needs. Sounds quite prosperous to me.
Without central planning or benevolent bureaucrats.
I don't see any real argument against central planning here, other than it's central planning. I would take a benevolent bureaucrat that remotely cares about my needs and interests over a shallow, bought-out politician that answers only to the highest bidder. Any day.
More capitalism, more growth. More capitalism, more growth. The formula might seem deceptively simple, but it works. So how do we lift up the next billion? The answer should be clear. If you really want to help the poor, stand up for capitalism. I'm Arthur Brooks, president of the American Enterprise Institute for Prager University.